Well, buenas tardes, and thank you in advance for your patience. A frequent assertion in the historiography of Latin American art holds that the agenda of modern art in our major capitals has been addressed with delay. Currently under debate, this issue based on a concept of homogeneous historical time is still in good health. In this regard, the processes that take place in the 1920s and 30s can be seen as the clues to develop other work hypotheses, which not only permit to reveal new aspects of Latin American art and culture, but also shed light on the larger narrative of modern art. On the basis of this premise, this paper will outline some clues for a critical revision of this stretch of the narrative of modernism. Historical critical parameters of the visual experience during the interwar period, some historiographical landmarks. Let us look at the information coming from printed objects, namely some essays published during this period. Such essays contributed to a reflection on contemporary visual experience as well as the systematization of modern art history just as it was taking place. This approach serves two purposes. On the one hand, it revises the historical critical configuration, and on the other hand, it looks at the repertoire of available literature and images responsible for the construction of an inventory of modern art in the 1920s and 30s. Furthermore, for the artists in the different cultural capitals involved in the modern project, the image of modern art took shape not only through travel, exhibition, or workshop experience, but also to a great extent through the printed material then available. Such materials blaze the trail to follow and the relation to establish within the workplace, as well as in the nomadism process typical of the artist of the time. Thus, I would like to deal with some essays on modern art published during this said period on the assumption that many of them represent the first appearance of certain images, names, aesthetics, and debates, whilst others reveal the inclusion of the work into a wider universe. These early forms of modern art history narratives were shaped in the heat of a moment in order to mold the process currently in progress. Please allow me to put forth another hypothesis. These first sketches provide a plural and more dialectic insight into that stretch of art history. On the basis of those texts and the presence of artists and works in publications such as the one we were looking at here, we can envisage a modern art that reflects the dialectic of exchange, follows, and coexistence in major cities, rather than clinging to the avant-garde sequence. These texts expand the field of the notion of modern art to what has been defined as realism, a concept that comprises a wealth and a variety of forms and nuances that we will attempt to approach. By 1925, Franz Ronach Realismus, a widely popular book in Europe and America, discussed the vital experience that undermined the art of his time. Dreams and reality, evasion and commitment appear as integral parts of the same perception, of the same representation of contemporaneity, and also as part of a problem to be solved by the artists of the time, Europeans and Americans, left-wing and right-wing. In the worlds of Raw, this new world of objects is still alien to the current concept of realism. However, the new figuration was part of the spoils of war in the symbolical political battle during the interwar period. The contenders of the battle were artists from diverse latitudes who seized the plastic resources of the new figuration in a distinct fashion, as will be discussed later. In his extensive essay, Franz Roh attempted to define the identity of the plastic arts of the early post-war years and contributed to the formation of the visuality of the time. The watchword of that period rose above the calls for revolution and the restoration of order, interpreted as the recovery of figuration based on the rediscovery of certain coordinates of the art of the past, archaic, neoclassical, Roman, and early Renaissance art. From different fronts, an attempt was made to rebuild, on the basis of the symbolic order, what was falling apart in the real world. Guillermo Apollinaire's L'Esprit Nouveau, de Chirico's ideas and the Pittura Metafisica, Carrà and the Valori Plastici were indispensable references for the artists of the time and were later recovered by Margherita Sarfati in Novecento for the Moderna Italianità. Likewise, we can mention the recovery of the classical figuration in Picasso and the validation of this process as a retour à l'ordre by Jean Cocteau, as well as Breton's use of the notion of surrealism when he adopts and expands Apollinaire's invention. Another perspective where the previous ones converge is Nachrealismus, the direct theoretical matrix of the first exhibition named Neue Sachlichkeit. Summing up, this starting point resulted in multiple voices, palettes, and outcomes. Beyond any doubt, Italian painting is widely acknowledged for its strong presence in all this process. Nonetheless, everyone saw it as a covering development that brought together artists from different capitals as well as diverse aesthetic and political backgrounds. Similarly, Sarfati revisits the German critic when she defines contemporary art reading the framework of fascism by including the artist in what she called Novecento Italiano, a state-backed art that, since its first exhibition in Italy that opened in 1926 by Benito Mussolini's endorsement, turned several major European and American capitals. Novecento, defined as an avant-garde renaissance of an uninterested, stern, and non-sectarian nature, was collectively exhibited in Milan, Rome, Venice, Berlin, Zurich, Amsterdam, Paris, Bern, Lucerne, and Pittsburgh. These venues preceded Buenos Aires, where the exhibition of 108 works by 45 Italian artists representing what Sarfati called modern Italianity was held in the controversial September of 1930. Rowe underscores the plastic aspects rather than the political affiliation, although he limited his definition of magic realism to a non-reactionary perspective that included artists from multiple countries. Sarfati, in turn, did not hesitate to embark Italian art on a conquest of the Western art world. Both strive to define the characteristic of the new art in its multiple directions, to arrange it conceptually, and to place it historically within both the modern tradition and a larger one, that of the classical aesthetic canon of Western art. Sarfati and Rowe crafted a plastic map in the mid-1920s. Long before, in 1940, Ugo Nebbia published a vast illustrated book called La pittura del Novecento, a summary of 20th century art in the footsteps of Sarfati and Rowe. He adopted the term Novecento both as an art of the century and an art related to a critical stage of painting of the early 1900s. Such an art took shape after much rebellion and indiscipline that shook the art arena. In Nebbia's words, a distinct physiognomy is thus recovered on the basis of a significant restoration of tradition and the eternal principle of art as a whole. Nebbia wrote a very comprehensive art history, including Cézanne and diverse aesthetic trends. His account goes from Matisse to Dufy, lingering to Picasso, covering his early works, The Young Ladies of Avignon, a number of Cubist pieces, and the Brothers, Braque, Gris, Léger, and other Cubist artists, Duchamp's Nude Descending the Staircase, Mondrian, Kandinsky, Arp's works, and the surrealist proposal of Masson, Ernst, and Schwitters, among others. Finally, he closed he closes this first part with a chart that appears in the cover of the Cubism and Abstract Art published by the Museum of Modern Art of New York. This chart depicts the art movements and mutual influences that converge into the modern art scene between 1890 and 1935. The idea was to use this chart as a summary of another art history account written by Alfred Barr for the MoMA and published in 1936, which emerged at the same time as the ones we are addressing here. It is based on the gradual abandonment of figuration while regarding the abstract geometric and non-geometric art as a final destination. This model is introduced in dialectical opposition to what the Italian critic states in the second part of the book, focused on the Novecento Italiano. And the third part that deals with the Novecento Straniero. In the latter, he expands on modern artists from France, Japan, Hungary, Austria, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, Brazil, the Soviet Union, Argentina, the United States, and Mexico. In summary, Nebbia gives an account of all the countries to believe to have a share in the configuration of modern art, particularly those that managed the recover the Renascentesca, Novecentesca dimension of Italian nature, with diverse nuances and influences. This selection of some of the first critical historical accounts of modern art was based on the topic of this essay, interwar realism and their widespread circulation. Such accounts result from different history models. For example, in the case of Nebbia and Barr, his dialectical counterpoint, the argument hinged on a progressive assumption that regards contemporaneity as the final destination of all the previous essay. Thus, the concept underlying the selection and makeup of the account are Novecento, a conceptual synthesis of contemporary figuration and abstraction. Meanwhile, the reflection that Carl Einstein was then reading about modern art in Art of the 20th Century and documents may be read as a response to this type of linear and homogenizing discourses, although he agrees with the emerging historiography of modern art by drawing the line between Impressionism and Cubism, his dialectical itinerary, and his idea of the image as a symptom set him apart from the above-mentioned text. Around that time, Walter Benjamin's Surrealism, the last snapshot of the European intelligentsia, also represents a dialectical perspective where the surreal image is seen as a profound illumination, following the dialectical view of everyday occurrence as impenetrable and the impenetrable as an everyday occurrence. Going back to the essay examined, Rowe also seeks a dialectical solution that reflects on the simultaneity and succession of processes in modern art. He also acknowledged the simultaneity of diverging processes and states. We cannot move in several, though limited, directions which are all equally meaningful. He concurs with Einstein and Benjamin in the tension between subjectivity and objective reality. However, unlike his German peers, and just like Sarfati, Barr, and Nebbia, as well as most contemporary historiography, the concept of style as an organizing element underlies his account. The historical critical outline presents the construction of this stretch of the interwar art as representative of the visual culture of the time. Allow me to add that the works of Rowe, Sarfati, and Nebbia, all written before the end of World War II, show a more comprehensive range of artists than those written in the second post-war period. The former discovered different places and groups of diverse origins in major capitals that are effective media of transference and construction of exchange networks between such spaces and their original location. This might account for the ability of major capitals to interact. For example, Paris and Berlin maintain fluid interchange with their peripheral counters such as Madrid and Brussels. In Europe, and Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Mexico in Latin America. This interaction through publications, exhibitions, books, catalogs, and the visit of foreign artists, intellectuals, and collectors explain the convergence of a visual culture related to the new figuration in these places in the 1920s and 30s. Modernity has been defined as a universal, extensive, and homogeneous process. Some authors, however, question such definition and asserted the need for a revision of the diversities and discontinuities of the modern project in different locations. Thus, it can be stated that it is by the end of the 1910s when the artists from the periphery, principally Latin American artists, tuned with this intense dimension of modernity. Text and images from magazines, photographs, books, catalogs, and exhibitions could then arrive in the European and American periphery from the major capitals. Following their reference network, the local press thoroughly covered the most relevant European exhibition and published translations of the aesthetic critical essay that fostered ideas and debates. This wide range of text and exhibitions laid the foundation of images, ideas, artists, and places to be explored and shaped the mental maps that peripheral artists, Americans and Europeans, carried with them on their journey to modern art center. Thus, academic tradition and contemporary repertoire were brought together and seen in the same light. Willing to join this ongoing process, a myriad of artists toured Europe with this background. Their prime destination was Paris, though they went to other cities as well. They visited Italy with devotion and examined the traces of classical tradition in their pursuit of modern art. Following raw observations, a new figuration that redefined realism sought to reunite reality in the nexus of visibility, and to restore the elemental joy of saying again. Further on, Raw added, painting now perceived the reality of the object and the space as a second creation rather than as a mirror of nature. We conclude, interwar painting searched for a complex and plural vision of reality. Such a vision was permeated by new vital dimension that took hold of the images and conquered both artists and audience that were unable to stay away from the contemporary aesthetical political tension of modern debate. Notes for some visual itineraries between realism and the surreal. Selections are often arbitrary. So is the imaginary museum we have all built. However, a visual itinerary of the interwar period based upon those figurations that can claim to be identical to a notion of realism is a valid resource to address the question put forth in this paper. Therefore, I would like to suggest some organizing coordinates. One of them arises from the very artistic practice of these years, the recovery of the genres of painting and of the trade. Another one advocates a wide selection of artists that furthers the convergence as well as the appropriation and resignification developed in different cultural settings. Finally, the concept of the artist as a beacon and the counterpoint between pieces and text will provide his selection with a meaning. In 1919, De Chirico defines art as a fatal net which catches these strange moments on the wing like mysterious butterflies, feeling the innocence and distraction of common men. Now, what are these strange moments? De Chirico's paintings give the answer, filled with the dense silence of all his works. Piazza d'Italia transmits this disturbing atmosphere, and Melancholia represents another cornerstone of his proposal. With these resources and the ideas that they put forth in this text, the Quirico, a beacon artist, become a point of reference for the emerging figuration. His silent atmospheres are a hallmark, as well as his ability to create visual syntheses which violate the logic of the audience through the combination of the elements presented. The Quirico explores a dissonant silence that can also be found in the works of other artists, such as Carlo Carrà, who also upheld the metaphysical proposal. With these elements, we can mention the plastic features of most of their interwar figuration, including surrealism, the estrangement of space, of the elements on the surface, of the materials, of the lights, and of time. Gross' works show the influence of the metaphysical proposal in his work. The same applies to the work of numerous artists of different origins who oscillate between the disturbing silence of the metaphysical proposal and the surrealist pièce, and later in the 1930s, the debates on social realism. It is worth stressing that they are all responsible for the construction of an image of the era, which in turn was often used by the states for their representation. Such was the case of Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and with slight differences, Italy, Germany, the United States, the Soviet Union, and Spain, to name a few. The distinctive feature of each of them will be choice of objects as well as the distance to them, whether objective or expressive. They all sought a representation that illustrated different sides of a disturbing presence, with the exception of state-backed art that arrives to set models of history, society, and men. Therefore, the resignification of each form of representing reality are diverse. Reality is then questioned and challenged from different positions. Likewise, the modes of representation expand the boundaries of figurative convention and follow a path that goes from the recovery of the trade and the classic tradition of Western art to other forms to aspire to be included in realism. Victor Cúnzolo, an artist from Buenos Aires, sheds light on this matter in his work. This work, Tradition, it is a still life through its titles brings it closer to an allegory. This piece includes the elements of the modern plastic tradition in a Rio de la Plata setting. The interaction of cultural capitals in modernity also appears in this work that features the latest illustrated edition of Martín Fierro and the catalogue of the Novecento Italiano exhibition published for the show in Buenos Aires in 1930. Towards the second part of the interwar period in Latin American capital, modern realist figuration was seen as a tradition within the visual experience of the 20th century. Cúnzolo develops a synthesis of the plastic scene of his time. His work includes a number of common elements, such as Ross, the notion of naturalismus, this convergence, the construction of a tradition, and inclusive concepts such as Ross and Sarfati lead us to believe we are in the presence of the same structure of feeling. This concept, formulated by Raymond Williams, appears here as a cultural hypothesis to look at the works under analysis. Let's then consider how the present view organizes the past, select and reselect its elements, and so it shapes the present. This realist revision represents the basis of the recovery of a representative tradition and is used in multiple ways, though they all tend to dissociate objectivity from the observation of the everyday. The works act on the conventions of Western painting figuration, but they introduce something that sent us elsewhere rather than leaving us in the quiet land that we are familiar with. We are led to a more real, dissociated dimension where the natural is separated from the psychological, which roles the representation of the real. We can then assert that both surrealism and realism claim to account for the real. This imaginary exhibition of several artists searching for filiation, inversion, and shifts of meaning, presence, convergence, and different appropriation of these modes of expression in the debate on realism and more intensely in the debate with the surreal. The selection displays several features whose common factor is the estrangement that upon the audience, in the eyes of whom uneasiness rests. They reveal a territory where realism goes beyond the boundaries of the real in material terms to perceive other realities. The unexpected bursts in and settles down inexorably. The subversion of the images alters the nature order in an attempt to produce an uneasiness in spectators. The Quirico proves the impossibility of representation, or rather its limits, by a subtle intervention in the construction of the image that upsets the order of the real and thus shows estrangement. The artists presented here, on the other hand, turn these language resources into materials that offer an overexposure of the image by creating representation elements. Hence, they carry out an active intervention of painting in society, such as Bernie's strategy in many of his oil paintings. In the Unemployed, the ambiguity of space, interior and exterior, urban and natural, together with the exposure of the characters to their own inner self, results in a complex, quietly dissonant and disturbing atmosphere. The device of this surreal period, coupled with the discussion on social realism among artists that belonged to the Communist Party, produced not only a number of works that addressed this debate, but also a text entitled New Realism, which redefined art practice by recovering subjectivity, the trade, and the work of the artist. Finally, more about realism. Benjamin's thesis on the philosophy of history deals with the perception of contemporary time. History is the object of a construction whose place is formed not in homogeneous and empty time, but in that which is fulfilled by the there and now, the here and now. Such here and now updates aspects of the past, the dialectic leap that seek other articulations within the assumption of a continuous time, thinking of the present as now time shot through with splinters of messianic time. New orientation about the issues analyzed in this paper can be added by placing the debates on realism with Benjamin's historical critical proposal. Thus, a perspective of realism seeks to materialize and universalize the present, relating it homogeneously to a linear and historicist vision of the past. In turn, another perspective reactivates the past to unveil a puzzling selection of the present. From other standpoints, the appropriation of this figurative representation suggests a break within the continuum of change dynamics of action and reaction described in a history of forms. On the basis of this new realism, this appropriation proposes a more effective rearticulation of art and society. In response to metaphysical stance that introduce the suspension of time, or the so-called modern classicality, texts like Bernie's New Realism, his works, and the works of other artists refute that nostalgia for the past that dignifies the present. Breton's surrealists propose endorse the pursuit of absolute reality, where, in Dali's words, super reality would be contained in reality and vice versa. Then surrealism could be taking a stand in the same dispute over the appropriation and representation of the real. This paper attempts to expand the horizon of this debate that can be further challenged by other texts worth reading and reviewed, with new players not included so far in major narratives and revisited through itineraries that illustrate the vastness of the modern scene. Although this paper may not provide the reassuring effect of labels, the narratives, works, and information presented may contribute to expand the questions that pose a challenge to the inquirers about high modernity.